Book called Digital Madness by Nicholas Kardaras. Fascinating book. It's kind of got a lot to talk about today. That's what it looks like, Digital Madness. How social media is driving our mental health crisis and how to restore our sanity. So, most scientists operate using the precautionary principle. If a scientist thinks a particular action or invention may be too risky or profoundly negative, then it's best not to proceed. The clinical fallout from social media contagion has created a tech addicted, impulsive, hypersensitive, egocentric, instant gratification society with its polarizing social media echo chambers. It has bred an angry, intolerant, narcissistic, and borderline like volatile population. Borderline personality disorder, typified by all or nothing, black or white thinking, is now our cultural diagnosis, where hysterical all caps tweets and political extremism on both ends of the spectrum, of course, have replaced rational critical thinking and civil discourse. Tech addiction, mental illness, and polarization. Many remorseful tech defectors lament that this had not been the plan. This was not the way that things were supposed to be. Social media are tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society is supposed to work. No civil discourse, no cooperation, misinformation, mistruth. Nobody ever intended any of these consequences. Once Google realized how easy it was to generate money via the search engine itself through the sale of keywords to eager companies rather than the clutter of selling ad space like their competitors had been doing, it was game on. All high-minded, lofty ideals fell by the wayside. Gaming addiction is so severe in the military that there have been several documented and shocking cases of military babies dying in the crib from parental neglect as their fathers played marathon video game sessions. The problem became so significant that the DoD had to create a new cause of death for infant death certificates, death due to electronic distraction. Research has shown that people who are predisposed toward addiction have lower baseline levels of dopamine, as well as other neurotransmitters, such as endorphins and norepinephrine. Thus, they're more likely to get hooked on any substance or behavior that increases dopamine because their brains crave it more than those of the people who have normal baseline neurotransmitter levels. Many people with addiction are comorbid. They also struggle with another mental health disorder. 85% of people struggling with addiction have other mental health issues, whether they are diagnosed or not. The two big ones are depression and anxiety. The majority of people who struggle with addiction will also say they struggle with depression and or anxiety and are self-medicating with the addiction. The problem is that addiction and mental health disorders are bidirectional forces that synergize and amplify one another. Brain imaging research shows that eating can raise dopamine levels by 50%, while sex can raise dopamine by 100%. Snorting cocaine increases dopamine by 350%, and ingesting crystal meth creates a whopping 1,200% increase in dopamine. Brain imaging studies show that video games increase dopamine as much as sex, about 100%. A person is getting a brain orgasm every time they play a video game. Research looking at rats in caged or open spaces found that the rats in open spaces rejected the need to consume the addictive substances available while the caged rats routinely overdosed themselves to death. Addiction counselors often describe their clients as becoming addicted in order to escape from their perceived toxic environment. Humans can be physically free, yet still feel trapped in a cage psychologically. The person who hates their job but can't quit for financial reasons. Humans can be physically free, the person who's stuck in a bad marriage, the person with no job or housing opportunities, the person suffering from a debilitating physical or psychological condition, the person who sits in front of a glowing screen for hour after hour every single day is also in a caged environment. The same researchers who did the caged rat studies also looked at humans and their environmental conditions. They found native peoples of Canada and the United States had been put in their own Skinner boxes, reservations and reserves that denied them the traditional cultural connections, practices, and social bonds. Before the colonization of Native Americans, there were hardly any records of addiction. Once the native people were colonized, alcoholism became close to universal. There were entire reserves where virtually every teenager and adult was either an alcohol or drug addict or on the wagon. The question is, does our current high-tech world breed the hyper-individualistic, hyper-competitive, frantic, crisis-ridden society described in the cage rat research that was the driver of addiction? A reasonable person would have to answer yes. A record number of deaths among young people have been attributed to what have been dubbed deaths of despair, which, according to the CDC, took over 200,000 lives in pre-COVID 2019. Drug overdoses, suicide, chronic alcoholism. So many young people had died during the period between 2017 and 2019 that the average U.S. life expectancy had decreased for the first time in over 100 years. Not since the global devastation of the influenza pandemic of 1918 had we seen average lifespan rates decrease in the United States. Some of the despair is economic and the byproduct of hopelessness over lack of meaningful employment. But it also seems to be more than just those circumstances, as statistics show that millennials are suffering from a loneliness epidemic. 1 in 5 millennials have 0 friends and describe feeling lost and empty. Our high-octane dopamine-spiked screen experiences have primed young people, habituated them, to need higher and higher levels of intensity to get the same dopamine rush. They've developed a dopamine tolerance and need higher and higher doses to feel something or feel anything. The humdrum real world seems extremely boring to a person perpetually overstimulated and awash in constant stream of social media, gaming, and other dopamine spiking digital platforms. The problem then becomes doing anything that doesn't involve the dopamine spiking screens. For example, sitting in a classroom, former hobbies, face-to-face relationships, a walk in nature. It leaves a person feeling understimulated as they experience an inevitable dopamine crash, a depression, boredom, emptiness, anhedonia, where experiencing pleasure can feel impossible. And that's what anhedonia means, the inability to feel pleasure. Young people have been robbed of the ability to develop the skills of patience in their instant gratification digital age. That's extremely toxic, not just because impulsivity also correlates highly with negative future outcomes like substance addiction, but also because the things that typically give a person their most profound sense of purpose and meaning usually take time to earn or achieve. Yet, if a person is primed for impulsivity and impatience, as research shows that those on high-octane screen diets are, then they also miss out on finding those rewarding, special, and potentially life-defining, meaningful accomplishments. Why do the young people feel so empty and hopeless, which has manifested in suicide at record levels, over 47,000 suicides and 1,380,000 attempts in 2019? Being sedentary in and of itself has been proven to be a significant driver of depression. Psychologists have known for decades that the best non-pharmaceutical antidepressant is physical activity. Anything that gets the body moving also increases serotonin levels and helps to oxygenate the brain. Researchers know that humans were never designed for the sedentary, indoor, sleep-deprived, socially isolated, fast food-laden, frenetic pace of modern life. Diseases of despair and even depression, both lifestyle-impacted ailments, were essentially non-existent in non-industrial and indigenous societies. Studies with women found that numerous chronic small stressors lead to depression. It seems that chronic numerous small stressors create a ripe condition for depression that can be triggered by a single bad life event. It isn't just one negative event that triggers depression, but chronic stressors over a long period of time before the one acute event takes place and acts as the tipping point. The more positive stabilizing factors women have in their lives, the less likely they are diagnosed with depression, even if they have chronic long-term stress and an acute episode. A healthy supportive environment rich with stabilizing factors such as supportive friends, close family members, or a supportive partner all works to immunize the person from getting depression. Depression can be caused by a long-term toxic lifestyle. A chronically stressful life that leads to depression will indeed alter a person's brain chemistry. It is the toxic lifestyle, however, that causes the neurochemical imbalance associated with depression. Disconnection from meaningful work. If you're working at a dead-end job that you hate and that gives you little sense of purpose or passion and that offers you little control or autonomy, that's a problem. Hell, sorry, I misspelled hate. This is a reflection of our loneliness epidemic. We don't share any meaningful experience with other people, and your cat doesn't count. And I have a cat that looks just like that and does exactly the same thing. I have to lock him out to keep him from jumping up on my screen. Disconnection from meaningful values, letting the shallow and materialistic so-called influencers and out-popular culture shape the values of our society so that they're based on materialism and extrinsic and our popular culture. Man, I can't type. Letting the shallow and materialistic so-called influencers and our popular culture shape the values of our society so that they're based on materialism and extrinsic rewards rather than intrinsic values. Disconnection caused by childhood trauma. Trauma does lead to mental health issues, and the traumatic experience you go through as a child significantly increases the likelihood of a later diagnosis of depression. Disconnection from respect. The compromised self-concept and dignity of people in dehumanizing and oppressive systems can lead to depression. Can and do lead to depression. Disconnection from the natural world. People profoundly need a connection to nature and the natural world and become very unwell when they are removed from contact with the natural world. Native American warriors went insane when they were forced into captivity on reservations and lost their connection with nature. Animals in zoos experience what is called zoochosis, or they rock back and forth and often hurt themselves or chew on the enclosure, as destructive as that is. Disconnection from loss of hope for a better future. When a person cannot clearly see a hopeful path forward in their lives, they can develop feelings of learned hopelessness and helplessness and depression. Americans are 10 times more likely to have depressive illness than they were 60 years ago. Recent studies found that the rate of depression has more than doubled in just the past decade, while low-tech societies like the American Amish have almost non-existent levels of depression. 6 lifestyle changes from caveman therapy. Get regular daily exercise, get involved in social activity where social connections are made, eat an omega-3 rich diet, get plenty of natural sunlight, get ample sleep every night, participate in meaningful tasks that leave little time for negative thoughts. If you take a depressed person and have them live a more back to basics type of lifestyle, their depression will disappear. It is the struggle for survival that hones and sharpens a sanity-sustaining sense of purpose, which humans need. All people benefit from time outdoors in nature. Psychological benefits include reduced stress, anxiety, and depression. The physiological benefits include improved concentration and cognitive function, pain control, and faster recovery time from injuries. The attitudinal benefits include greater happiness, life satisfaction, reduced aggression, and better social connections. The culprit in our mental health crisis is a toxic modern civilization. We are simply not meant to live sedentary, overstimulated, more isolated and atomized, less communal, nature disconnected, meaning devoid, hyperkinetic, sleep deprived, and overstressed 21st century lives. Years ago, social scientists identified what they called sociogenic or social contagion effects. Behaviors, emotions, or disorders spread by social networks or groups of people. It is monkey see, monkey do social learning theory. Sociogenic. Junk food linked to mental illness. Household chemicals lead to respiratory conditions. Sodas inflate the testicles. Bad diet linked to blindness. Toxic chemicals lead to gut issues. Personal care products linked to infertility. Modeling peer pressure and groupthink all rolled into one. Smoking because your friends smoke. Listening to country music and going to NASCAR races because you moved to Nashville and have a new group of friends. You start laughing at a movie because everyone else is laughing. You go skinny dipping because your friends are swimming naked wearing sombreros. And there they are. A 2019 Harris poll of school children in China and the UK and the United States asked them if they would rather be an astronaut, a musician, a professional athlete, a teacher, or a vlogger, a YouTuber. While 56% of the children in China want to be an astronaut, the leading professional aspiration in both the UK and the United States was vlogger or a YouTuber. Oh, God. Social media influencers are people who have large audiences or followers on their social media accounts, and they leverage this to influence or persuade this following to buy certain products or services. Kylie Jenner has 278 million Instagram followers and is reputed to be worth $700 million. Kylie Jenner, isn't she the youngest one? I don't know. The influencer is entirely defined. Their entire sense of value is determined by the number of followers they have. The influencer groupthink paradigm makes popularity and not quality. The primary value does this cause a sense of valueless emptiness. Almost everyone feels a sense of emptiness. 61% of Americans report feeling lonely. Nearly half say they feel left out. And Gen Z are the loneliest of all, with 68% saying they feel that no one really knows them. And this is a vlogger by the name of Mr. Beast. And of course, I've never heard of him because I don't really go on Instagram. I'm not on Instagram. In 2012, Facebook researchers used nearly 700,000 Facebook users as guinea pigs, sending them happy or sad posts to test whether or not emotions can be contagious on social media. The results? Yes, the emotions shared via social media did have a social contagion effect and were contagious. And this is information from Frances Haugen. Frances Haugen was uh, uh, she used to work for Facebook. And this is part of her testimony. Facebook had done internal research that had indicated that Instagram was harming teenage girls by, she's a whistleblower. Facebook had done internal research that had indicated that Instagram was harming teenage girls by increasing their thoughts of suicide and exacerbating eating disorders, and yet did nothing to change the algorithms that were causing the harmful imagery because it was thought that it would decrease engagement. This is what is called thigh gap. This right here, and for the longest time, girls were putting pictures on the internet showing a gap in their thighs uh, because that proved that they were skinny, they were slender. And of course, if you didn't have a thigh gap, then you weren't skinny enough. If your thighs actually touched each other, then you weren't skinny enough. As weird as that sounds. Facebook would often selectively exempt high-profile users known as X-check clients, like celebrities, politicians, and journalists, and would allow them to post content that violated Facebook's content policy against posts that contained harassment or that could incite violence. And of 2020, there were 5,800,000 X-check users, people that had gone against their criteria. One of them was Donald Trump, and this guy is, I can't think of his name. He just got arrested in Romania for trafficking underage women. Facebook made a conscious decision in 2018 to use an algorithm that they knew would increase anger among its users because they knew that anger was a more profitable emotion to elicit as it increased platform engagement. Facebook allowed bad actors and foreign entities access to its platform by consistently understaffing its counter-espionage information operations and counterterrorism teams, which Hagen considers a national security threat. While Hagen was a Facebook employee from 2019 to 2021, she spent time working on the company's counter-espionage team and saw China using Facebook to surveil Uyghur dissidents and Iran using it for espionage. While Facebook may present a facade of benevolent company whose goal is to connect people, their actual agenda is user engagement and profit, often at the expense of their users. Facebook researchers found that 32% of teen girls said that when they felt bad about their bodies, Instagram made them feel worse, from an internal slide presentation in 2020. Comparisons on Instagram can change how young women view and describe themselves. From a Facebook slide presentation in 2019, we make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. Teens blame Instagram for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression. This reaction was unprompted and consistent across all groups. And this is actually the same lady. And this is, as you can see, she's got a thigh gap now, and that's what she wants. Among teens who reported suicidal thoughts, 13% of British users and 6% of American users traced the desire to kill themselves to Instagram, another Facebook slide presentation showed, and yet they still refuse to change the toxic algorithm. There you go, thigh gap again. Instagram curates images of anorexia to teen girls who have anorexia and other eating disorders by barraging them with photos and videos of other malnourished girls, a practice that experts say has shown to worsen their eating disorders as it triggers their unhealthy compulsions. Wow. The National Association of Anorexia Nervosa and Associated Disorders reports that 5 to 10% of anorexics die within 10 years after developing the disease. 18 to 20% of anorexics will be dead after 20 years. Only 30 to 40% will ever fully recover. And there you go. Look how skinny her legs are. Wall Street Journal created a dozen fake TikTok accounts registered as 13-year-old girls. Within weeks, the accounts were sent tens of thousands of weight loss videos. Some videos included tops about 300 calorie a day restrictive diets. Gee, many Christmas, you need 1,200 calories just to stay alive. Others recommended consuming only water or taking laxatives, while others showed videos of emaciated girls with protruding bones and shaming comments for those who wanted to reject these extreme diet ideas. 40% of Instagram's users are 22 and younger, and about 22 million teens log onto Instagram in the United States each day, compared with only 5 million teens logging into Facebook, where young users have been shrinking for a decade. On average, teens in the United States spend 50% more time on Instagram than they do on Facebook. Zuckerberg refused to incorporate the proposed fixes because he feared people would interact with Facebook less. Facebook only does well when its users are unwell. Everyone emotionally triggered and staring at a screen for 24 hours a day would be the ultimate success for Facebook's bottom line, but wouldn't be so great for humanity, as you can see from those extremely skinny legs. Academic research shows that teens on a screen for more than 5 hours per day were 20% more likely to have suicidal ideations and actions than teens on a screen for less than an hour a day. In 2017, the American Journal of Epidemiology followed the Facebook use of more than 5,000 people over 3 years and found that higher use correlated with self-reported declines in physical health, mental health, and life satisfaction. Pediatricians all over the world noticed during the COVID year, 2020, that teenage girls who were on TikTok and were following a popular TikTok influencer who made videos about her tic disorder started manifesting behaviors consistent with Tourette's syndrome. And this is the girl right here. She has Tourette's. As you can see, she has a physical tic. Tourette's is a nervous system disorder that causes people to make repetitive involuntary movements or sounds, typically affects more boys than girls by a rate of 3 to 1, and tends to be diagnosed at a young age. Linked to various parts of the brain, it includes the basal ganglia, which helps control body movements and also seems to have a genetic or a hereditary component. New cases were flooding into the pediatric hospitals in the United States, Canada, the UK, and Australia. They were mostly teen girls instead of boys, and instead of the more common facial tics, most had exaggerated hand and arm movements and also what's known as coprolalia, the repetitive and involuntary use of obscene language, which is quite rare among those with genuine Tourette's. Coprolalia. At Texas Children's Hospital, the caseload for patients with tics had multiplied by several dozen since March of 2020. At Johns Hopkins Tourette's Center, they went from a pre-pandemic rate of 2 to 3% of pediatric patients to a staggering 10 to 20% of their pediatric patients showing signs of a tic disorder. At Rush Medical Center in Chicago, their rate of patients reporting tics had doubled after 2020, with the vast majority of new Tourette's patients being female. Some researchers and clinicians have developed the term Munchausen by internet, or digital factitious disorder. Most of the teens had some level of psychiatric history, depressed or anxious, etc., and the Tourette's influencers themselves did not present with the types of tics that seasoned medical professionals have come to expect from genuine tic disorders. And this is the actual individual with the tic disorder. The rest of these, yeah, there she is. It is certainly possible that certain disorders can be subconsciously mimicked. For doctors who worked with some of the Tourette's cases, they indicate that most of the teens were previously diagnosed with anxiety or depression that had either been brought on or exacerbated by the pandemic, and that then seemingly made them more vulnerable to mimicking something like Tourette's syndrome or any other type of witness disorder. In 1774, Goethe published a novel called The Sorrows of Young Werther. The novel was about a love triangle between Werther, a young Charlotte, and Charlotte's older husband-to-be, Albert. Werther, without prospects and poor, decided that someone had to die to end the unpalatable conundrum. Werther borrowed 2 pistols from Albert and shot himself in the head. The novel was a resounding success. Young lovesick men all over Europe dressed up like Werther and shot themselves in the end to end their pain in a phenomenon known as Werther's fever. The problem became so severe that the book was banned in Italy and Denmark. Werther fever was a classic social contagion effect. With suicides, the thinking goes like this. When one person does something extreme, it lowers the threshold and makes it more permissible for the next person to do it. And the same for next person and each subsequent person thereafter. And thus, with each successive suicide, it becomes more and more normative and acceptable for the next person to do it. And of course, they call it a social contagion, but those of us who have been involved in these suicides refer to it as a cluster of suicides. Social media has become seemingly sentient. I was involved in one of these in Omaha when I was living in Omaha in the 1980s. At a high school, Bryan High School in Omaha. It's a Catholic high school. Of course, Catholics aren't supposed to commit suicide, otherwise they can't be buried in hallowed cemetery. But these kids were, I guess, there were only 5 that actually committed suicide. There were 17 that attempted suicide. So it was a cluster of suicides. Social media has become a seemingly sentient organism that feeds off of our primal id and then regurgitates those baser impulses back to us in high-octane form, not only intensified but veiled by the normalcy of community. On the dark web, there are all sorts of groups catering to the once socially outcast. Entire virtual communities are devoted to everything from bondage enthusiasts to cannibalism, to pedophile groups, to all manner of fetishes and or deviances. The problem is that some fetish groups can cross the line into full-blown illegality or violence. Complicating things even further when it comes to fetish sites are the distinctions between fantasy and reality. An example would be the cannibal cop of the New York Police Department, who was a member of an online cannibal chat group and was then arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. His defense attorneys argued that it was all just elaborate, perverse internet cannibal cosplay, and he was just living out a fantasy online and would never have been pushed to carry out his fantasies into real-life violence. And he was acquitted. And there's the cannibal cop right there. Some online groups start off as one thing, usually benign and harmless, then mutate into something quite different and potentially more lethal. The incel movement started out as a support group for the lonely and awkward of all genders, but morphed into a subculture of misogynistic and angry young men, some of whom have committed mass murder in the name of their mutated and misguided cause. And these guys, they call themselves the incels, but these are the bad guys. This is the Chad, and this is the Stacy. The incel movement is a perfect case study of what can happen when an initially innocent group of lonely people looking for kinship and support get twisted and perverted through the amplification and extremification of digital media. These lovable yet romantically challenged souls eventually became a community and began calling their issues involuntary celibacy, and later adopted the shorthand of incels to describe themselves. The incel world of the 1990s and early 2000s was a friendly place where awkward men and women would talk to one another about relationship support and advice. With technology and the internet acting as a hatred accelerant, sexual frustration was turned to hatred, and hatred was spilled over into full blown, premeditated acts of violence and murder against women and the men that they love. Since 2014, at least 8 mass murders with 61 fatalities have been attributed to men who either self identified as incels or who had incel related writings on the internet. On May 23, 2014, Elliot Rodger went on a shooting, stabbing, and vehicular rampage where he killed 6 and injured 14 near the UC Santa Barbara campus. After the carnage, he took the path of the fictional Werther and shot himself in the head. Virtually canonized by his online fans, he has been referenced as the inspiration by the incel community. Mass violence by incels is regularly referred to as going ER, or Elliot Rodger. On 23 April 2018, Alec Manassian rented a Ryder truck and used it to run over and kill 10 people in downtown Toronto, Canada, and injure another 16. Shortly before his attack, he posted on Facebook citing the Incel Rebellion and giving kudos to Elliot Rodger. The Incel Rebellion has begun. We will overthrow all the Chads and Stacys. All hail the supreme gentleman, Elliot Rodger. Remember, these are the Stacys. Whoops, Stacys and Chads. Incels are not merely an isolated subculture disconnected from the outside world. They are a dark reflection of a set of social values about women that is common, if not dominant, in broader Western society. The intersection between this age-old misogyny and new information technologies is reshaping our policies and culture in a way that we may only dimly understand and may not be prepared to confront. Okay, this is the ideology of incel. They are narcissistic. They have a fascination with Elliot Rodger. They blame women for perceived injustices because they won't go out with them. They're socially awkward and they tend to be isolated. They spend way too much time online. They want to dehumanize women and they threaten violence or rape of women. There have been 1,316 school shootings in the United States since 1970. According to experts, school gun violence falls into 2 broad categories. The larger number of gun incidents resulting in death occur at inner city schools related to incidents related to conflicts between students that reflect crime, drugs, and gang activity. The smaller number are mass shooter incidents that affect suburban white schools and are fueled by mass acts of revenge. Former Marine Charles Whitman mounted the University Tower in August in 1966 and began sniping the people that he saw. This was at the University of Texas. 96 minutes later, he was shot and killed by police, but not before he killed 14 and wounded 30 others. 3 months after Whitman's rampage, 18-year-old copycat Bob Smith entered the Rosemar College of Beauty in Mesa, Arizona, and shot 7 people, killing 5. He later told police that he was inspired by Whitman's act. On 20 April 1999, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold opened fire on their schoolmates in a school in suburban Denver and killed 12 and wounded 21. Klebold and Harris were lonely gamers who had been bullied in a vengeful rage. They had originally intended to blow up their school, but settled on a mass shooting retaliatory strike against the kids whom they felt mistreated them. And this is a picture of Klebold and Harris in the lunchroom. Beginning with Whitman in 1966 and since Columbine in 1999, school shootings have gone viral in the digital age. 2005, Red Lake High School in Minnesota, 8 were killed. That's a Red Lake, that's an Indian reservation, Ojibwe Indian reservation. 2007, Virginia Tech, 33 were killed. 2008, Northern Illinois University, 5 were killed. 2012, Oikos University in California, 7 were killed. 2013, Santa Monica College, California, 5 were killed. 2014, Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut, 21st graders and 6 adults were killed. In 2015, Umpqua Community College in Oregon, 9 were killed. 2017, Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, 17 were killed. 2018, Santa Fe High School, 10 were killed. 2022, Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, 21 were killed. 27 March 2023, Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee, 7 were killed. And 7 June 2023, Huguenot High School, Richmond, Virginia, 5 were killed. While school shooters are outliers and extremely rare, the conditions of the digital age have created conditions of emptiness, reactivity, anger, self-centered narcissism, and desensitization. The predictive algorithm of our digital echo chamber make the user the center of the universe. That's their narcissism, while addicting them to highly arousing and numbing content with no sense of intrinsic meaning and purpose. Young teens and young adults are numb and looking to feel anything, a jolt of something to escape their emptiness. The young, empty, and angry men are actually ghosts. Like any ghost, they lack corporeal substance and they lack a soul or an identity. They are transparent apparitions that are merely the illusory shadow of a fully formed human. And like the metaphorical hungry ghost of addiction, they have a bottomless and unsatiable appetite. In this case, their desperate need to feel something, anything, to feel any sensation. They burn themselves with cigarettes. The pain gives them momentary corporeal existence and identity. A ghost with an automatic weapon in a crowded gathering is looking for their 15 minutes to validate that they exist, rush to feel alive, power and control that the impotent feel when hurting others, delusional sense of accomplishing some misguided mission where for once they feel a sense of purpose. These empty ghosts are created in our dehumanizing and numbing digital laboratory. Via the digital contagion, they find community and resonance with other outliers in the modern public square, social media sites, and chat rooms. In 2018, we had a school shooting every 8 days. In a sickening twist, the worst of the school shooters are immortalized in first-person shooter violent video games. Super Columbine Massacre RPG, where the player assumes that the role of Klebold or Harris and shoots figures based on the actual victims of Columbine. VTech Rampage, where the player stalks from building to building on the Virginia Tech campus, breaking into classrooms full of students. When the designers were asked to take the games off the internet, they demanded donations. They were ransoming. On 13 October 2021, a woman was raped on the SEPTA commuter train in Philadelphia shortly before 10 o'clock p.m. Initially, the attacker approached the woman and started verbally harassing her. Then he started touching her sexually. After 45 minutes of her protest and his increasingly aggressive behavior, he raped her. Not a single person on the car helped the poor woman, except that after the fact, when a SEPTA employee called the police. SEPTA surveillance video shows that a couple of passengers did reach for their phones, but they didn't call 911. Instead, at least 2 of the passengers seen on the surveillance video were shown holding their smartphones toward the attack and filming it. The task of AI on platforms like YouTube is to develop algorithms to recommend and autoplay videos that optimally encourage users to watch video after video after video. The AI Research Division's job is to apply neuroscience, neuroeconomics, cognitive and behavioral psychology, moral reasoning, and deep thinking to their coding. This embeds an extremification loop in the algorithm that results in a desensitization due to numbness from the repetition, just like hitting your head with a hammer. We live in a prison of two opposing ideas of binary thinking. It is the prison of many borderline personality clients. They fluctuate between one extreme to the other at any given moment. The borderline paradox is when the BPD client can embrace both polarities simultaneously. Our society has developed into a binary trap, and there cannot be any middle ground. You're either one thing or the other. There are also a borderline pain paradox. Individuals with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder often report experiencing high levels of physical pain as a result of long-term health problems. Yet, when it comes to short-term visceral pain, such as acts of self-harm, it isn't felt at all. EEGs of the phenomenon show that during intense short-term pain, bipolar disorder brains, not bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, BPD, by borderline personality disorder, brains quickly start producing theta waves, the brain waves of sleep, trance, and deep relaxation. We know that when the body is injured, pain-killing endorphins are released to help temporarily numb the pain. Dissociation, the experience of feeling out of your body during intense stress or trauma, also inhibits pain, as on a neurological level, the brain temporarily shuts down all but the most basic functions. That is why for the borderline personality disorder clients, visceral pain is often underexperienced, while they are also quite sensitive to long-term chronic pain. This phenomenon explains why cutting, burning, or other forms of self-harm often don't hurt the borderline personality disorder client, but are dangerously addictive. They're an endorphin rush, and like dopamine, a person can get habituated to chase the endorphin rush. On a psychological level, many borderline personality disorder clients talk about cutting themselves in an effort to feel something, where otherwise there is no immediate sensation other than numbness. Borderline personality disorder clients tend to engage in what's called splitting, seeing others as all good or all bad, and seeing everything through an extreme black and white binary lens. This is known as dichotomous thinking. Borderline personality disorder clients commit suicide at 50 times the normal rate and are comorbid for addiction 70% of the time. They are reactive, they struggle with relationships, and generally have extremely challenging long-term outcomes. The causes of borderline personality disorder are caused by three intertwining factors: a bad childhood, bad genes, and bad environment. Borderline personality disorder has over 50% heritability. You can inherit borderline personality disorder at a higher rate than major depression. Childhood maltreatment, either physical or sexual or neglect, was found in the histories of 70% of people with borderline personality disorder. Maternal separation is common, which explains the pronounced fear of abandonment, as is poor maternal attachment, inappropriate family boundaries, parental substance abuse, and serious parental mental illness. Separations, disagreements, and rejections, real or imagined, are the most common triggers for symptoms. A person with borderline personality disorder is highly sensitive to being abandoned and left alone, which then emotionally floods the borderline personality disorder client with an intense feelings of anger, fears, suicidal thoughts, and self-harm, and often leads to extremely reactive and impulsive decisions. The lack of consistent nurturing structure and boundaries can be viewed as inflaming or causing the volatile dynamic. 1.6% of the US population, or 4 million, have borderline personality disorder. 20% of the psychiatric inpatient population suffer from borderline personality disorder. 75% of those diagnosed with borderline personality disorder in the United States are women, though many go undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, and this may be due to a gender bias. Borderline personality disorder clients can be challenging in treatment settings because of their behaviors, which are often corrosive to other clients. That many mental health programs will either refuse to accept them or will refer them elsewhere, citing disruptive and unmanageable behaviors. This sometimes results in clinicians purposely misdiagnosing them to afford the client more treatment options, the borderline personality disorder in their chart, condemning them to having difficulty finding treatment. However, there are high rates of self-harm and suicide if proper treatment is not received. DSM, borderline personality disorder symptoms: self-damaging behavior such as gambling, overeating, substance abuse, record levels of addiction with a record number of over 100,000 overdoses last year. All-time high was self-harm, over 47,000 suicides. And I have a great niece with borderline personality disorder. And all the things they're talking about, she's tried and done. Intense but unstable relationships. Divorce rates have doubled over the last 20 years. Divorce rates went up 34% during the pandemic. Intimate partner violence has been steadily rising and increased 20% during the pandemic. Uncontrollable temper outbursts, national volatility, and civil unrest seem to be increasing. Combustive incidents are increasing on college campuses. Statistically, violent crime rates have increased in the major cities. Uncertainty about self-image, gender goals, and loyalties. Gender dysphoria has increased significantly. Self-defeating behavior, fights, suicidal gestures, or self-mutilation. Suicide rates were at an all-time high the year before the pandemic. Chronic feelings of emptiness and boredom. Overstimulation by electronic devices has led to a boredom epidemic. There has been a spike in emptiness and ennui among millennials and Generation Z. We find that personality disorders occur most often in first-degree relatives. When treating people with borderline personality disorder, I find that most of them have never experienced trauma, but many interpret normative life adversity as traumatic events. I wasn't picked for the cheerleading squad, and that was traumatic. I was grounded for sneaking out of the house, going to a party, and doing drugs. That was traumatic. One thing I have seen as a new type of, this is Sarah White. She's a BPD specialist. So when I say I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about Sarah White. One thing I have seen is a new type of client who presents with a sort of pseudo borderline personality disorder. They present as having these unstable interpersonal relationships, self-image, affects, and impulsivity, but they don't meet all the criteria. In an isolated clinical setting, their symptoms dissipate. Once their needs are met and they are away from their normal stressors, they regulate, improve, and go back. It is clear that they do and did not have borderline personality disorder. It seems that as we continue to turn our attention to dramatic displays and reward immensely maladaptive behavior with more attention, We're encouraging the youngest in our society to embrace instability, feeling worthless, always striving but never achieving, and a never ending competition. So many kids now have watched live streams of individuals cutting themselves using drugs and dramatically crying about various situations. This content is not really moderated, and anyone can post and broadcast whatever they like. We also have reality TV, which gives us this unending view into the lives of others, which often are encouraged to display the most interesting, dramatic behavior possible to keep an audience interested. If they weren't dramatic, then nobody would care and they wouldn't watch. Unfortunately, what is interesting and attention grabbing is also the most unhealthy display for any young person who is developing. People who are pseudo-transgendered are really detrimental to actually transgendered individuals because they're often engaging in a litany of maladaptive behaviors and behaviors that are atypical for a trans individual. These instances produce fuel for the arguments against transgendered individuals because the pseudo-trans individuals will attempt to use being transgendered as a sacred cow that nobody will ever question and that makes them infallible. Rapid onset gender dysphoria is gender dysphoria that began after puberty. It usually begins around age 7. Though rapid onset gender dysphoria is not officially recognized, adolescents with rapid onset gender dysphoria did not show any signs of gender dysphoria before puberty, which is unusual. 62.5% have been diagnosed with at least one mental health disorder before declaring their transgender status. Had a sudden and significant increase in their social media usage, 63.5%, before coming out as trans. Were disproportionately female to male identities at a rate of 80% natal females. Recorded average is 20% female to male. After coming out, there was an increase in conflict with parents and an antagonism toward heterosexual and non-trans people. Parents reported being derogatorily called breeders or being routinely harassed by their children who played pronoun police. The children adopted specific trans-positive language that they had seen on social media, and the parents described their children as sounding scripted, reading from a script, wooden, like a form letter, verbatim, word for word, or practically copy and paste. And this is a band from the 1990s called the Breeders. I just thought they had a song called Cannonball that everybody thought was really good. And as it turns out, the two lead guitarists, these are both females, and the guy is the drummer. Our new sedentary, digitally dependent lifestyles are driving us insane and killing us. There is ample research that shows that high-tech living is driving our record rates of psychiatric disorders, for example, depression, anxiety, and addiction, that are then contributing to our epidemic levels of suicide, overdose, and mass shootings. The damage goes beyond our mental well-being. We are experiencing record rates of heart disease, obesity, and cancer, just as our entire society seems to be imploding in a polarized, angry fireball of societal unrest. It is important for the human psyche to have a strong connection to nature and the natural world. The root cause of many of our neuroses, both personal and societal, is a disconnect from the earth. Most of us today are so far removed from nature that we don't even realize that we are missing a critical nature connection. We feel stressed and anxious, and yet don't even realize that we may be suffering from nature deficit disorder. After a catastrophic event, most people are resilient and will recover spontaneously over time. A small percentage of individuals do not rebound, and they do require extended psychological care. But researchers found that the single intervention of a therapeutic debriefing session does nothing to alter this dynamic. And the people who didn't bounce back seem to already have psychological vulnerabilities. Studies have found that people at the greatest risk for PTSD have a history of childhood abuse, family dysfunction, or pre-existing psychological disorder. And this is something that we discovered in Vietnam. American pilots who were prisoners of war in North Vietnam highlighted the importance and role that a strong baseline of mental health plays. Although the pilots endured years of torture and solitary confinement, they showed a surprisingly low incidence of PTSD. It was hypothesized that because pilots are screened for psychological health and trained for high-stress combat, they had stronger psychological immune systems and were able to tolerate their trauma in a way that people who were more psychologically vulnerable never could. And if we look at all of the combat veterans of Vietnam, one of the things we discovered was those that were abused as children, that had already experienced trauma before they went to war and experienced the trauma of war. Those were the individuals that suffered from the most severe PTSD. After 9/11, one survey of 988 adults living close to the Twin Towers, conducted 2 months after the towers collapse, found that only 7.5% had been diagnosed with PTSD. 6 months later, found only 1.7% of New Yorkers were suffering from prolonged PTSD. This indicates that the most normally psychologically healthy people will naturally get better over time and have innate resilience after being exposed to a traumatic event. We as humans have developed our own reservoirs of strength and resilience in the normal course of our development. What can be helpful is peer support, the AA paradigm, rather than professional psychological counseling. The reality is that stress can be beneficial as it builds resilience, and via the release of neurohormone oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, that's released during times of high stress, we are propelled to reach out to other people and be more social when times are difficult, biologically hardwiring us toward a healing socialization. Our modern and technological society has made us less resilient, more reactive and brittle, more impulsive and lonelier. Our high-tech lives are compromising our psychological immune system. The digital age has stripped children of all the ingredients that are necessary to develop what psychologists call resilience and coaches call grit, which are critical ingredients in a person's healthy social, emotional, and psychological development. In today's click swipe world, we've created children as instant gratification vessels who have not learned the fundamental life skills of patience and overcoming adversity. We're seeing record rates of impulsivity as evidenced by the almost 50% spike in ADHD. Research shows a link between screen time and ADHD. Screens are very arousing and stimulating for a child. The child then becomes stimulation dependent and can't focus unless they're being perpetually stimulated. Overcoddled children are resilience deprived. Resilience building takes patience and perseverance. Adversity, competition, hardships, pain, obstacles, all of that can develop and strengthen our resilience. Struggles in our lives give us our depth, our compassion, and our resiliency. They make us human and need not be debilitating. Key variables when defining grit are passion and sustained persistence applied toward long-term achievement with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. Grit combines resilience, ambition, and self-control in the pursuit of goals that take months, years, or even decades. But the two key ingredients to grit are passion and persistence. Data shows that no more than 1 or 2 out of 10 people who complete rehab will stay clean and sober for a year. Others have it at 5%. Regardless, the treatment industry has a lousy batting average. People relapse, and with drugs like fentanyl and OxyContin, fatal relapses of people just out of rehab are more and more common. That's what relapse is. Okay. Our immersion into our screen lives acts as kryptonite on both our grit and any sense of genuine purpose and meaning in our lives. Getting lost on Instagram or gaming or getting sucked into TikTok or YouTube rabbit holes just weakens us, enables our sloth, and robs us of any purpose in our lives. And there you go. Kick it. Play that video game. And that's it. Pretty good chapter. Fun chapter. I enjoyed it. So I will talk to you again next week. I don't know what we're tackling next week,